You know, not every fight is won by yelling the loudest. Sometimes the biggest victories, they're quiet. They show up in the stillness with the simple, heavy weight of a fact, a truth that doesn't have to shout to be heard over everything else. Let's get into a story just like that, about finding strength, not in the argument, but in the silence of the record.
For me, it all kicked off with a single word, a label. One carefully chosen word meant to tear down everything I am, everything I've ever built. They thought it was the master key that would just unlock my entire life, letting them walk right in. They stood in a court and they said I was unstable. And they used that word to try and take my home.
The peace of the morning just shattered. It wasn't a phone call. It was a sound that just cuts right through you, straight to the adrenaline. This hard, metallic pounding on my front door. And then a voice, booming through the wood, impatient, official, announcing the sheriff's office. Right then, in that second, my whole world just tilted on its axis. I was on my side of the door, and on the other was a reality I couldn't even begin to wrap my head around.
To really get how we ended up there, you'd have to understand my family dynamic. See, I've always been the quiet one, and my parents, well, they made a huge miscalculation. They always saw my quietness as me being compliant, not as me thinking or observing, but as me just agreeing. They thought my silence was obedience, like it was a blank page they could just write whatever story they wanted on. They were about to find out just how wrong they were.
Their whole plan was built on a lie. Right from the foundation, they swore to a judge that I'd been properly served legal documents. The thing is, those documents, they were sent to an old address, a place I hadn't lived for a very, very long time. Their entire strategy depended on me never seeing them, never even knowing what was coming until it was all over. And that wasn't just some mistake, That was deliberate. That was the first crack I found in their story. I remember looking out my window, and across the street, I saw my mother. And she wasn't worried. She wasn't wringing her hands. There was nothing, no concern on her face at all. Instead, there was this look, this quiet, chilling satisfaction. It was the look of somebody watching their plan come together perfectly. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't some kind of intervention to help me. This was a seizure.
So you have these two completely different realities, right? On one hand, you have the story they told the world, this tale of a reluctant, desperate emergency action to save a loved one who's in crisis. But then you have what they actually did, and the reality of their actions was a calculated, fraudulent eviction. And it had one goal, and one goal only, to take the house that my grandfather had left to me. So what I do for a living? I'm a structural engineer. My entire job is about finding stress fractures in steel, in concrete, finding the weak spots that could cause a total collapse. It's all about understanding what holds up under pressure. And now, I had to do the exact same thing with my own life. Their story, it was a structure, a poorly built one. And I needed to find the one load-bearing lie that if I could just push on it, would bring the whole thing crashing down. After a while, the shock, the anger, it started to fade away. And what was left was this cold, quiet focus. See, they wanted an emotional fight. That's their territory. My territory, that was the facts. So I didn't scream, I didn't call them, I didn't confront them. I went to work. I sat in the dark and started digging through my company's internal records. I wasn't looking for an argument, I was looking for an anchor. One piece of data that was absolute.
I knew I needed something that was completely undeniable, something they couldn't twist or argue away. I mean, human memory is a funny thing, right? Stories get bent. But some systems, they just record what happens. They don't have feelings, they don't have a motive. So I started searching. Badge scans, computer logins, digital footprints, anything that would put me in a specific place at a specific time with total certainty. I was hunting for a silent witness.
When we finally got to the courtroom, their whole case came down to one simple physical impossibility. The story they told, the papers they filed, that emergency order they got, it all hinged on something they swore happened at a very specific time. But for their story to be true, the judge would have to believe that I could literally be in two separate places, miles apart, at the exact same time.
When it was finally my turn to speak, I didn't give a big speech. I didn't plead my case. I didn't get emotional. The courtroom was dead silent. I just walked up to the judge's bench and I placed one single document down on the wood. That was it. No drama. Just a record. Because what I've learned is that the truth, it doesn't need a grand entrance. It just needs to be there.
So what was this document? It was so simple, but its power was absolute. It was the parking gate log from my office building, and on it there was one highlighted line, an entry with a precise timestamp, and right next to it, an automated scan of my car's license plate entering the corporate parking garage. It was undeniable proof that at the exact moment they swore I was somewhere else, signing away my home, I was actually just pulling into my spot at work.
And that was my grandfather's voice that I promised they were going to meet at court. It wasn't a person. It was his legacy. The principle of integrity he drilled into me, the importance of keeping meticulous records. That single, unshakable truth, captured by a simple machine, was more powerful than any story they could ever hope to invent.
The judge looked at the document, then looked over at my parents, and the silence in that room was heavier than any argument could ever be. There was no discussion, there was no debate. The judge just referred their case straight to the district attorney for investigation into conspiracy and fraud. The sound of the gavel when it finally came down was really just a formality. The whole thing had already been decided by a single line of text on a sheet of paper.
The reversal was instant, and it was total. In a blink, their entire construction just crumbled. The eviction order they had immediately voided. A serious criminal investigation into what they did launched. And the house, my home, it was, without a doubt, still mine.
The very next thing I did, I went home to secure my peace. I changed the locks on my door. And it was more than just a practical thing to do, you know? It was symbolic. Every turn of that screwdriver felt like a statement. It was me drawing a new boundary, a permanent one. It was me making sure that the only way into my home and into my life was with my permission. It was the quiet, final sound of an ending. And really, that's the whole point of this, why it matters. We live in a world that is so full of noise and arguments and people trying to manipulate your emotions. But sometimes the most powerful thing you can be is quiet, as long as you're standing on a solid foundation of fact. They showed up with a loud, messy, desperate story. I answered with one quiet, undeniable record. And in the end, the record won. So it kind of leaves you with a question to think about. We all have these things, right? Truths we know for sure. The records of our own lives. Facts that don't change no matter what stories other people try to tell about us. So what is it for you? What is the quietest, most powerful truth that you hold? What's that unshakable record that defines who you are?